and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. It's our Halloween special and I'm very excited to bring this one to you, and it's definitely a big one too, with lots of different types and mythologies to go over. It should be lots of fun. If you didn't catch my announcement last week, this will be the last Myth Monsters episode of the year until our holiday special to bring in the new year. If you want to hear more about why I've done that, I'll say a bit more at the end of the episode, or you can watch my TikTok video which posted everywhere to see what's going on. Also, just to kick us off, I'm aware Halloween has passed. I'm sorry it's taken so long for me to get this out. Also, considering Halloween was on a Thursday, it's gutting. But considering I've been struggling to get out normal episodes on time, getting out a massive special is super challenging at the moment. And my script was 20 pages, which I wrote by hand, so I hope the spooky spirit is still with you. It's with me all year round. To start off with, dragons are a huge topic, and there are loads of different types of dragons. So, what I'm going to do is split them right down the middle and put them into two different categories, and go into them in their own right, with European dragons and Asian dragons. Named dragons from certain mythologies will get their own episodes in the future, for example Fafnir from Norse mythology, so I won't spend any time looking at them in this special, just as a heads up. So, European dragons. And when I say European, I mean that they came from here, but are used across most Western nations, including the US, as their stereotypical dragon. European dragons are described as scaly, reptilian monsters, ranging from quite small, around 2 to 3 feet at their absolute smallest, to monstrous sizes to over 100 feet. These are usually found to have horns around their face and head, with long pointed snouts, and sometimes would have manes like horses. Almost like dinosaurs, they would be covered in thick scales and sharp horns along their entire bodies and their backs, and that would run the whole way down to their tails, which would be made up of either hair, sometimes fins, or the occasional spiked club or mallet shape. They have bat-like wings, which usually support their whole body weight and allow them to fly, and the large dragons can have wingspans of up to 200 feet in width, making them incredibly intimidating when they're above you. Dragons usually have sharp teeth, and are sometimes known to breathe either fire or poisonous gas from their mouths, depending on how early you look at their versions. They are usually four-legged, but can sometimes be no-legged with a more serpentine body, depending on the variation and location you're looking at. They can also sometimes said to have multiple heads, or a variational number of limbs. However, they can fall into other monster categories. For instance, the Linnaean Hydra from Greek mythology is sometimes considered a dragon, but I am not including this in this category. I personally consider the Hydra to be in a league of its own. It's its own monster, it's not a dragon. This is ridiculous. Dragons, though, are generally malevolent towards humans, depending on what fairy tale you're reading about them in. They're incredibly intelligent, and are actually known for manipulating humans into getting what they want, and are sometimes known to be able to communicate with people too. These more intelligent dragons are also known to love damsels, such as princesses, the reasons of which we're not entirely sure, but their biggest obsession is usually gold or treasure, which they hoard in huge quantities and are extremely protective and obsessive over. Dragons usually live in caves, mountains or caverns throughout Europe, but are also known for breaking into castles in order to access their wealth and start their draconic hoard. And when I say throughout Europe, I really do mean that too. almost every European country has a myth about a dragon within its mythology, and they generally all match up across the board in terms of description and powers. Speaking of their powers, European dragons can breathe fire or poison, as noted previously, but they also have poisonous blood, leaving most assailants to their death post-defeat of the dragon, where they would be celebrating and realise the blood is all over them, and they would either melt away or burst into flames. Dragons are incredibly strong and difficult to kill, with usually only 1 or 2 weak spots, and complete immunity to poison, fire and magic. To add to all of that, they're usually either immortal or very close to it. Dragons will not die of old age, however, as I mentioned, they do have some blind spots, which are usually in the eye or in the chest or belly area, which you would have to pierce with something considerably durable and large. Dragons are completely carnivorous and tend to eat livestock and people as their main food source. However, sometimes they are known to pick up surfacing whales, dolphins, sharks and large fish from the sea. They do in particular, though, really enjoy eating us. They tend to be solitary creatures, living alone in their caverns with huge hoards of cash. However, when dragons reproduce, they do so like large reptiles in modern day, and will mate and then abandon each other and lay eggs. Female dragons are very protective of their young, and they will stay with them until they are large enough to hunt on their own, which is when they leave the nest of their mother for good. There are a few variations from the traditional European dragon, such as wyverns, which more resemble bats with large wings, but they use them as arms, but they don't technically have arms, and will usually have a scorpion-like sting on the end of their tail. I'll be covering wyverns in another episode in the future, but they are worth a mention here. Drakes are also another type of European dragon, but are much smaller than their larger cousins. They will have 4 legs, but either very small or no wings at all. But they're a lot easier to fight, but most likely to develop an environmental based power based on where they live, like water powers if they're around water, or breathing fire if around volcanoes, for example. Another is worms, spelt with a Y, not an O, like the insect thing in the ground. I don't know if they're an insect. Worms are serpentine dragons that resemble these Asian dragons that we know of more than European ones. They have no legs or arms, but they will have wings from time to time. Again, worms are big enough to cover in their own episode, so I'll leave this one here and move on to their Asian counterpart. Asian dragons, or really Eastern dragons, are almost the complete opposite of European dragons. They are typically described as serpentine creatures, again varying in size from around a grasshopper small, all the way to be big enough to fill the space between heaven and the earth. Asian dragons usually have deer-like antlers and much slimmer dog-like faces and snouts, with long whiskers like cats. They are also scaly, but they're very exact. They have exactly 117 scales, where 81 of them are the positive yang essence and 36 of them are the negative yin essence. These dragons don't tend to have wings, but they fly around like giant snakes, weaving through the air gracefully, but also have very small and short legs to support them on the ground. However, the amount of legs can vary as to how large the dragon is, so you could end up with one with just the normal 4, but you could have one with 100, and the length of the Great Wall of China. When they do have wings, which is much rarer, they usually have angelic or bird-like wings, which have a much wider wingspan than the European dragons. Asian dragons are usually benevolent to humans, and can even become mentors to humans wanting to understand the ways of the heavens. They are incredibly intelligent, actively try and communicate with people, and are considered semi-divine or almost godlike. So they are immensely respected and sometimes worshipped still to this day within Asian cultures. These dragons live in the clouds, rivers and seas, as they are mostly associated with the fluidity of water, instead of the hoarding dragons of the caves in Europe, more associated with the element of earth. They are most commonly found in China, Japan and Korea. However, they do feature in most Asian countries in the East Asian space. They also do not hoard wealth, but they can create it for others. What they do hoard though is knowledge, which they tend not to share with anyone. Their powers are also completely different to the European dragons, where they live and breathe the essence of life itself, and can grant powers to humans such as immortality or great riches or wisdom. They also have the power to shapeshift into human form or other animals, just to kind of get away with it for a bit. Asian dragons are also not usually sought after to be killed by humans because they are so benevolent. And whilst I mentioned that they are benevolent, they will defend themselves fiercely if attacked or threatened. And to match the European dragon, they are immortal, and to differ from them, they are completely invulnerable and can make their body completely permeable, to which they would then seek revenge. They do have quite an intense rivalry with tigers for some reason that I couldn't quite figure out from my research, but they are paired with the Fen Huang, the Chinese phoenix, as their male counterpart, as the Fen Huang are only female monsters. We don't really know much about the Asian dragons and their eating or reproductive habits, unfortunately, as they are almost at a godlike status or even a spirit-like status within mythology. So it's not really ever noted anywhere, which is a massive shame. But we don't believe that they ever ate people unless they were massively wronged by one, if you're wondering with that, I guess. The other Asian dragons are the Wani, specifically Japanese dragons, which resembled sharks and crocodiles and were incredibly ferocious sea monsters. The Umagi are Korean and Chinese dragons, which are again usually found in the sea and are massive sea snakes basically. They live like this until they are blessed by heaven to join their cousins in dragon form, and then are divine messengers afterwards. Quickly heading over to West Asia, there are also the Naga, which are sometimes also considered dragons. These half-snake, half-human hybrids are found throughout West Asia as well as the Philippines, and can be both good or evil. But they are mostly just shapeshifters. They are linked to snakes again, so I've covered them in their own episode already, so I won't focus on them here, and I don't think they sit massively in the dragons category. Now, on to etymology. We have a couple here for this week, as we are covering continents rather than one country. But for European dragons, it's quite easy. It comes from the Latin word Draco or Draconis, meaning huge serpent or dragon. However, the Greeks called it Drakon, meaning serpent, which comes from the Greek word Dokomai, meaning I see. We believe this comes from the idea of a deadly glance or sharp eyes, which we see in snakes with their slit pupils. This eventually made its way into the English language in the 13th century, which came from the Old French, which came from the original Latin, so it all comes around in circles eventually, but that's how it came into English. For Asian dragons, it's a bit simpler. In Chinese, long means dragon, and the Japanese is tatsu or ryu. These all very literally mean dragon, so it's very simple for this one. I can't find any roots anywhere, which implies that these are what they are, and that's what that character is about. Fun fact is that Long is a super common surname in China, and is considered to be of the dragon and very good luck, to represent strength and kingship. So if you have that surname, lucky you, you're a dragon. Now for origins, I'm going to start with European dragons again, and then cover Asian dragons because that makes it less complicated. But before that, I will mention that it's pretty unclear in all of dragon history when dragons first started to be talked about, because giant serpents are sometimes believed to be dragons, and some believe that they are the first mentions of them. I am not one of the people who believe this. There are giant serpent monsters and dragons, two completely different things. However, I will begrudgingly mention it, and those people believe that the first dragons were Apep and Nehebkau from ancient Egyptian mythology, who were both giant snake gods of the underworld, who were around way longer before any of these other dragons. But again, I don't think these are dragons, so I'm moving on and separating the two cultures now. In European history, the dragon comes straight from the Greeks and Romans, who used that original etymology Draco to describe them. Jason, the great hero, battled a dragon during his hunt for the Golden Fleece in the Argonauts myth. Ladon, the dragon, protected the apples of the Hesperides and was killed by Heracles. Cadmus fought the dragon of Ares, and Typhon, the legendary father of all Greek monsters, was supposedly a dragon who was defeated by the god King Zeus. So they have all been around since at least 800 BC, when the Greeks were really in their height of fame. But as well as the Greeks, the ancient Celts of Britain and Ireland were also well into dragons, who wore them as protective symbols against the Roman invasions, funnily enough, and wore them from around 400 BC with no known Roman influence. We're not 100% sure that the Celts had them before the Roman influence, but it was in Britain from this far back to have dragons within their myths. But just when the Britons thought they were safe, Christianity came along, and dragons were associated with the devil, as the Bible book of Revelation says that Satan is flame red, a dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, which then forever linked the dragon to evil. This image really has never left European dragons, and it was only really in the Middle Ages when they came back into society from this point. But in the Middle Ages in Europe, which was 500 to 1400 AD, dragons kind of made a comeback, because people genuinely believed that they were real creatures, and were petrified of them due to their size, powers, and links to the devil. The Vikings also mentioned dragons in their epic poem Beowulf, as well as having their own mythical dragon Fafnir, and the idea of dragons eventually became that they wanted to live in castles with golds, were greedy and gluttonous, and want young, virginal women to look after. And who deals with them? Well, heroes, of course, just to make the sad days of plague-ridden peasants a bit nicer. The Christians of Europe eventually decided to make a saint a hero in their story, who slew a dragon, St. George. His story is about taming and slaying a dragon that demanded a sheep and a human virginal sacrifice every single day. When the dragon went to eat the princess given, St. George stabbed the beast and subdued it by making a sign of the cross and tying the princess's girdle around its neck. St. George and the princess led the docile dragon into town, and George promised to kill it if the townspeople would convert to Christianity. All of the townspeople obviously converted, and St. George killed the dragon with his sword. St. George actually died in 303 AD, and this story was much later, but he was made the patron saint of England, and we have a fond attachment to dragons here in the UK. Dragons are often linked to Britain due to St. George, and due to the Celts, as they do have that natural origin story. It's also featured massively in our heraldry. The Pendragon coat of arms was 2 red dragons with crowns for King Arthur, who wasn't a real king, by the way. King Arthur also kills a large dragon or serpent in one of his stories, but again, he wasn't real, so I don't know what to tell you. The most important dragon in the UK though is the Welsh dragon. This gorgeous beast sits proudly on the Welsh flag in its all bright red, and is linked to the legend of a visionary who saw a red dragon representing the original Britons of Wales fighting and defeating the white dragon of the Saxons. But dragons, in wider Europe, still represent power, greed, evil, aggression, and corruption, which makes them a super cool figure within our media. So we'll get onto that later. But for now, let's go over to Asia, where again, the history and symbolism is so different from over here in Europe. Historically, the Asian dragon in the earliest depictions were much earlier than the European findings, going all the way back to 6200 BC, and the Chinese character for dragon, or long, was introduced in 4700 BC, which is considerably before the European dragon was even a twinkle in folklorist size. This is most likely from discovering quote-unquote dragon bones in ancient China, which were more than likely just bones of large animals, including the extinct horse Hipparion. The ancient Chinese then self-identified as the gods of the dragon, because the Chinese dragon is a reptile that represents evolution from the ancestors and key energy. The traditional image that we think of when it comes to Asian dragons appeared in around 1766 BC and introduced the dragon god, or the dragon king of the four seas. Each dragon king is associated with a colour and a body of water, the azure dragon representing the east, the red dragon the south, the black dragon the north, the white dragon the west, and then there's the separate yellow dragon, who is the incarnation of the emperor. These dragons also work with the four celestial elements, with the azure dragon representing the east, spring and wood, the vermilion bird representing the south, summer and fire, the white tiger representing the west, autumn and metal, the black tortoise representing the north, winter and water, and then coming together to form the Qilin, or sometimes the yellow dragon, representing the central element, midsummer, and earth as a whole element. But these aren't the only dragons within Chinese folklore. There are loads within their stories that you may know of, such as Qianlong, Yinglong, Zulong, Shenlong, or any of the other godly dragons, or even the 9 sons of the dragons, which are now in loads of architecture. And they controlled certain aspects of the world themselves, but I won't go massively into their stories today, and maybe we can cover them all at another time. In Japan, dragon legends are heavily intertwined with Chinese dragons, even using the Chinese words for dragon names. It is believed that Buddhist monks from across Asia transmitted dragon and snake legends from Buddhist and Hindu mythology to Japan, although there are some examples of indigenous dragons described in some ancient texts too, so we're not 100% sure. Now, we've talked a bit about symbolism for the Asian dragon with the emperor, but they also have a major part to play in the Chinese zodiac, where they are one of the 12 animals representing the 12-year cycle. They represent the element of earth, and are the 5th animal on the cycle, as well as being reflected in the stars under the constellation Draco. Because they are a sign of the emperor, they are often seen in Chinese celebrations with dragon dances, and are a sign of harmony, good luck and prosperity. I recently watched my cousin get married in China, and the dragon dance was my absolute favourite part of the ceremony, and this is done because the bride and groom are meant to represent the emperor on their wedding day. Now, bringing both of these back together, we have to talk about literature as a separate entity, as dragons are famously within some of the most famous books ever written. We are, of course, talking about the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien, the Harry Potter series, the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin, the Eragon series by Christopher Paolini are just a few, and dragons truly are an absolute pinnacle of fantasy monster. They are fantastic within any kind of fantasy series, games, film, book, whatever. They are also still some of the most sought after monsters within those medias, and people are still desperate to see dragons in them, and rightly so. Based on all that I've told you today, I'm sure you are aware of the effect they've had culturally throughout these two continents, and they just look massively cool. So, long live dragons is all I can say. Last point. I need to mention sea serpents quickly, because whilst I did mention earlier that big serpents are not dragon, I'm sorry, but neither are sea serpents, hence me not talking about them. Yes, they are massive, they look slightly draconic with their serpentine features, yes they can sometimes breathe fire, but very rarely, and they are monstrous and huge, but they are a whole other category of monster, just like the Hydra. I'm not covering them. Come back another time. So just to end the origin section, what do people think that this could have really come from? Well, of course, we do have actual dragons still on this planet with Komodo dragons, the world's largest lizard, who get their draconic name from their poisonous saliva and massive size, teeth and claws. These lizards are 100% not to be messed with, but are immensely cool to look at from a distance. But ancient people could have totally thought this was a small dragon. We also have crocodiles, alligators, and larger snakes like anacondas, which are often associated with dragons due to their size, ferocity, and general looks. And again, could totally be mistaken for one. So that's where we think it's come from. Now, on to our Halloween special segment. It wouldn't be a special without a special part in the middle now, would it? So what I'm going to do is read out these questions and then I will post them in polls on Twitter so that I can see your answers, and I'll publish the answers about a week later. Now, some of these have not been covered in the podcast and are general knowledge or modern media questions, so it will be tricky. Ready? Let's go. What is the name of the ancient symbol that depicts a dragon eating its own tail? A. Yin and Yang, B. Ouroboros, C. Enso, or D. the Celtic knot? Question 2. Which culture has a dragon within their zodiac? A. Indian, B. Greek, C. Chinese, or D. Japanese? Question 3. What is the name of the dragon in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit? A. Eliot, B. Caraxes, C. Mithrandir, or D. Smaug? Question 4. How many Disney movies feature dragons? A. 31, B. 14, C. 65, or D. 82? Question 5. In 2010, which of these countries had dragons on their national flags? A. China and Wales, B. Wales and Barbados, C. Bhutan and China, or D. Bhutan and Wales? Question 6. Which anime card game featured the Blue Eyes White Dragon? Was it A. Pokemon, B. Yu-Gi-Oh, C. Digimon, or D. Dungeons and Dragons? Question 7. Which of the following is not a term for a type of dragon? A. Worm, B. Wyvern, C. Lichen, or D. Tarragon? Question 8. What are the names of Daenerys' dragons in the Game of Thrones series? A. Meleys, Sunfire and Moondancer, B. Balerion, Viserion and Syrax, C. Vhagar, Dreamfire and Taraxes, or D. Viseron, Rhaegal and Drogon? Question 9. What is not the difference between Asian and European dragons? A. Western dragons have wings, B. Western dragons are reptilian, Eastern dragons are amphibious, C. They represent different aspects, or D. Eastern dragons are serpentine? Question 10 for the last one. What is the type of dragon Harry Potter must face in the Goblet of Fire? A. Hungarian horntail, B. Chinese fireball, C. Swedish short snout, or D. the common Welsh green? And that's it. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll have the questions on Twitter by the end of this week so you can show off your dragon knowledge. But now, moving on to modern media, we obviously have loads, and I've tried to condense these into the most popular. I'm aware this special is very long, so if I've missed something you love, then apologies, it most likely just didn't make the cut. For art, have a look at St. George and the Dragon by Paolo Uccello from 1470, or the illustration of a winged dragon by Friedrich Justin Bertuch from 1806. There is not a lot of named artwork this week, and that is the biggest issue, but have a look at independent stuff because obviously it's going to be really cool. It's dragons. You know where to look. In movies, we have Nazar, The Tale of Princess Kaguya, Beowulf, Eragon, Harry Potter, Dragonheart, Mulan, Raya and the Last Dragon, Sleeping Beauty, Dolittle, Godzilla, The Sword in the Stone, How to Train Your Dragon, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, D-War, Son of the White Horse, Dungeons and Dragons, Honour Amongst Thieves, Pompoko, Mythica, Seventh Son, Pete's Dragon, Atragon, The Missing Link, Damsel, Nimona, Shrek, The Flight of the Dragons, Wish Dragon, Dragon Fighter, On Draken, Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, Castle in the Sky, Quest for Camelot, Onward, The Neverending Story, Star Wars, Reign of Fire, Willow, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Spirited Away, and Tales from Earthsea. For TV, we have Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Slayers, Adventures of the Gummy Bears, Ben 10, Dragon Hunters, Grimm, The Dresden Files, Jackie Chan Adventures, The Dragon Prince, Farscape, Kamen Rider, Wakfu, Transformers, Nightmare, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Hellboy Animated, American Dragon, Jake Long, Power Rangers, Merlin, Hilda, One Piece, Naruto, The Munsters, Wish Fart, Avatar The Last Airbender, Lost Tapes, Monkey Kid, Dragons, Riders of Berk, The Librarians, My Little Pony, Primeval, Fangbone, Round the Twist, Special Unit 2, Shaolin Showdown, Star Trek, Bleach, Supernatural, Dragon Ball, Super Sentai, Fairy Tail, Inuyasha, The Ultra Series, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Digimon, Miraculous Ladybug, and Kajudo. In video games, we have ones such as Hyrule Warriors, The Elder Scrolls, Warcraft, World of Warcraft, Baldur's Gate, The Legend of Zelda, League of Legends, Them's Fighting Herds, The Legend of Spyro, Dragon's Lair, Metroid, Shantae, Fae, Destiny, Guild Wars, Lineage 2, Dragon Project, Rift, Phantasy Star Online, RuneScape, Temtem, Kirby, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Titan Quest, Mega Man, Super Mario Bros, Grow, Puzzle Quest, Age of the Ring, Black Myth Wukong, Dark Souls, Breath of Fire, Chrono Cross, Dragon Age, Elden Ring, Disgaea, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Fire Emblem, The Witcher, Golden Sun, Xenoblade Chronicles, Pillars of Eternity, Monster Hunter, Jade Empire, Teeny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, The Legend of Dragoon, Touhou Project, Dragon Veil, Total War Warhammer, Heroes of Might and Magic, Age of Wonders, Skylanders, Ark Survival Evolved, Dwarf Fortress, Minecraft, and Terraria. My book recommendation this week is for any of the literature I mentioned earlier, for starters, if you're into fiction, but otherwise have a look at A History of Dragons, Their Influence on Life and Culture by Sarah Beth Watkins, The Penguin Book of Dragons by Scott G. Bruce, Dragons, Wyverns and Serpents, Myths and Legends by Jean Menzies, the legend, or lastly, The Dragon, Fear and Power by Martin Arnold. If you have little ones, have a look at The Dragon Atlas, Legendary Dragons of the World by Anna Claiborne, or Dragon World by Tamara McFarlane for some really cute dragon facts with great illustrations. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? Yes, I definitely do, but in a much smaller space. I believe that dragons as a whole were misidentified from the start, especially European ones. Larger reptiles definitely explain dragons in my eyes, but that's not to say that it's a stupid conclusion from a Middle Ages peasant. They are massive, strong, and scary, as well as being reptilian, which a lot of people are scared of anyway. I do think the serpent dragon thing is still not a dragon, and I'm sorry, I'm sticking with it. They are giant serpents. It doesn't matter if they have some draconic connections. It doesn't make them a dragon. I also think giant snakes are cool enough on their own to not be associated with dragons. They have their own category, and I think that's awesome. You will not see me compare Jormungandr to Fafnir. That is for certain. But dragons are honestly the most brilliant and one of the most universal monsters we have, and one that we can all share a connection to in some way, no matter where you're from. It's not unusual to call something old draconic, or to refer to a grumpy old person as a dragon, or use the term dragon's horde. And we may think of different types of dragons, but it brings us together as a collective, and that is what folklore is for. I think that's great. I also think dragons are super cool, and whilst they've been overdone by terrible tattooists since the noughties, I still think they look sick. Like, look at the dragons from Game of Thrones, and tell me they are not the coolest thing you have ever seen, alongside one of the scariest things you could ever think about going up against. And who doesn't want to be Daenerys riding one? Remove Season 8 from your brain. Before then, who doesn't want to be Daenerys riding one? But what do you think? Did dragons exist amongst us in Europe and Asia and across the rest of the world? Let me know on Twitter. I would love to know what you think. What a brilliant monster to have as our honorary Halloween guest. And honestly, who doesn't like dragons? They are so cool. So I'm really glad we got to cover this one finally. And that's it, folks. I'm off till the new year. I'll be back late December / early January to kick off with a holiday special, but I really need to take some proper time off. I'm really burnt out and I've really not had any time to properly relax without worrying about the show for the past 3.5 years that I've been doing it. So I think it's time, and that means that you get the best content and I get some really well-earned relaxation time. I'll be back though, and in the meantime, use this to catch up on all of your missed episodes, re-listen to some of the super old ones and embarrass me really, but I'd appreciate the support, which has been amazing since the announcement. So thank you so much, and stay spooky whilst I'm away. I really do appreciate it. For now though, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you were listening on. I've got the Twitter for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube, Threads and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, including some very cool merchandise. And you can also find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals. They might love me as much as you do. But for now, and for later, stay spooky. And I'll see you later, babes.